Okay, just a quick video about PlayStation emulation on RetroPie and how that's set up and run. It's pretty straightforward, just as easy to add ROMs to this as it is to the other systems. There's a couple of slight quirks that make it a bit different, I'll go over those. But basically, copy a file over and it'll appear in emulation station like any other system. So like when you copy ROMs across for a given system, you get the icon popping up, and it's the same with the PlayStation. As soon as you put some ROMs in there that emulation station is aware of, you get the icon and you get some games in there. Now, I haven't emulated or tried to emulate games in PlayStation on RetroPie before, because I thought that quite often they're going to be massive files like 600 meg, maybe more for multi-disc, and I always use an SD card in the RetroPie rather than an attached storage device or a network storage device, so the size can be a bit limited just on the SD card. Obviously RetroPie is quite happy with, say, 64 gig cards, so there's a fair bit of room available. It may well take bigger than 64 as well. I just know that I've tried 64 and that's fine. With a lot of the systems like Mega Drive and SNES, the SNES system and NES, and they're barely a gig for the entire library, so it's not much at all. But when you get to MAME emulation or the arcade emulation, you can easily get a few gig for a system. I think if you put most of the parent ROMs on MAME for all, FBA and Neo Geo emulation, so that might be LibRetro FBA or something, you're looking at about 10 gig for all of those systems. So that starts to add up. But then if you put the PlayStation stuff on as well, then obviously they came on CDs, and a CD's in the region of about 650 meg, give or take. So they can really rack up. So it put me off, but really it's not too bad, because you're not going to necessarily want the entire library of PlayStation on there. You can just pick and choose the games that you've got that you want to get the ROM for. Obviously if you've got the game anyway, you can either rip the ROM from that or get it from somewhere else that's on the internet, copy them across and you'll be away. So you can see here I'm in emulation station, and on the PlayStation section I'm going in there and I've copied about 6 or 7 games. Here I've got about 8 there, and these are the ones that I like playing a few years ago, or about, I don't know, 20 years ago. And yeah, so you copy these across. Now the data, you can see I've got scraped data, but the scraping service that I usually use, that S-Self scraper, doesn't do PlayStation yet. So what I have done with these is use the inbuilt scraper, which I'd rarely do, because quite often if you throw a lot of games or ROMs at that inbuilt scraper, it doesn't seem to like it very much. It seems to struggle after it's gone through about 10 or 20. But if you've just got a few, like I have with the PlayStation, it was really good. And I might be able to show an example actually. Say I wanted to scrape this. Let's have a look. Press start, got scraper, press A, and scrape from GamesDB, it's fine. Scrape ratings on, that's fine. Scrape now. By default it says 16 systems selected. I don't want to scrape everything, I just want to scrape this PlayStation bit. So if I select that, scroll to the bottom, select none, go back up, just select PlayStation, press B, then it's got 1 selected. And I don't want to only look at, usually I'd only want to look at the ones without an image, i.e. the ones that haven't been scraped, but because I've got them all, I better say all games. And user decides on conflict, so if the system isn't sure it asks, which is fine, set on, and say start. Right, okay, so it's asking me for Castlevania, and it's not sure, mainly because of the name of that bin file. I think if I put it more with less of the underscores and hyphens, it might have worked it out. Anyway, so I go down to input, and it's sort of got a bit confused, so I'm going to delete everything in there. I think, like I say, it's the underscores, hyphens, whatever. So now if I give it a better clue by typing Castlevania, hit A, no, not hit A, hit B, then go to search. There you go, it's given me 2 options, Castlevania Symphony of the Night or Castlevania Chronicles. Well, I know it's Symphony of the Night, select that, press A, and it says working, and it's done it, and then it's moved on to the next one, Crash Bandicoot. I'm going to quit that now. If I say stop, 1 game successfully scraped. Okay, press B to get back. Yeah, it hasn't wiped the other ones, and it's just redone that one, which was there anyway. Oh, it looks like it wiped the times played as well, but that's just because I scraped it again. So yeah, it's actually a useful way of getting that metadata out of the inbuilt scraper. Quite often it doesn't. It's not a great tool for scraping loads of games. It's never been that effective for me. You might have a different experience, but it does tend to play out for me. Anyway, so this is running RetroPie 3 Beta 2, but it's going to be pretty much the same for any of the RetroPie 3 variants, and that's how I got the game scraped on there. So I'll just give a quick demo of what they look like, and after that we'll go and have a look in the back end and see how you copy these across. So if we run, I don't know, Crash Bandicoot, if you're quick, you can see at the top of the screen there it's got the name of the emulator. That's libretro PCXE Reloaded, or something very similar. Okay, so you can see here I've got an overlay as well of the TV. That's not me adding it after the game, that's a retroarch. Because the emulator is a libretro core, retroarch can be the front end, and because it's retroarch we can put these overlays on. So you've probably seen a different video, an earlier one I did a couple of weeks ago, about how to apply these. And since then I've written a tool to quickly automatically apply it for you as well. So if you like the look of the TV view there, and also you'll see the overlay's got some scan lines built in, and the tool can apply different ways of that to get the right effect that you like. It's a bit of a personal taste thing, but there's this version as well without the TV element to it, so it's just got the scan line effect. It looks a lot nicer. Without it, it can quite often look a bit too sharp. Okay, so the speed wise, this is a Pi 2, so the one that came out in February 2015, and you can see the speed's not bad. It's pretty responsive, even though it's got to deal with that 600 megabyte file. It runs through this pretty well. Let's see if I can interrupt it. Press start. Again, the controls are just picked up from RetroArch, so it's the same for all of those systems, quick and easy to run. Okay, load that one up. It's pretty quick really, it doesn't hang about too bad. I'm not noticing any lag. I mean, I haven't tried an actual PlayStation for a while, but it doesn't feel particularly sluggish to me. It's pretty good. I've tried a few games out. Some of them, maybe there's a brief, maybe audio glitch or slight jump in the video, but nothing really significant, I wouldn't have said. And this video is coming out of the Pi, so it's 1080p, but then it goes into my video capture, which is also 1080p, but then my TV isn't, so the exact ratios that you're looking at and quality aspect ratio might be slightly off, but you get the idea. This is just really to show you the quality of the graphics and the speed and the fact there isn't much lag. And yeah, it's a good game. It plays well, really easy. Okay, so I'm going to quit out of this with start and select, and it'll drop me back to Emulation Station. Give another one of those games a go. Again, they're all about in the region of about 600 meg each. Let's try Wipeout. This isn't actually, I'll show you in the back end in a minute. Wipeout is quite interesting because it's actually got about 8 audio tracks in it as well. So it can be, it can take a minute or two to work out how to copy that across properly to the Pi, and I'll put a link in about a tutorial of how to do that, because it isn't really about Emulation Station or RetroPie how to do that, but it basically converts multiple files where you've got multiple audio files, for example, and you need to convert those into a single file that the Pi is happier to run. And there's a few different ways of doing it, but I'll show you the way I've done it. It seems to work fine. Okay. And you'll see here when we start in the bottom of the screen, it'll say the audio track that it started. And if you don't do this copying process properly, it comes up with 0 there, so you can kind of tell the audio hasn't worked. There you go, CD track 4, and you won't get that if you don't copy it properly. Now the graphics do look a bit dated here, but at the same time it still plays really well, and you kind of get used to it not having quite that high definition graphic effect. It's still, underneath all that, a great game. It's even better if you're quite good at it, but I'll play it anyway. That's the problem playing the games when I'm doing videos. I just get distracted and just play the game. You get the idea, but I'm going to see if I can finish this lap. Second, anyway. Yeah, good game. Probably best in a darkened room with can of Red Bull. Okay. And it does save games as well. It because it's RetroArch, you could use save states, but also it would do the inbuilt save games, the SRM files, and I've got a separate video about what all that is. Yeah, right, quit that, start select. Okay, last one then, let's give FIFA 99 a quick go. And this one I did notice a couple of audio glitches on, but by and large it still seemed pretty good. I can't remember if this was one that dealt with separate audio files or not. I think it was all in one, so it didn't really matter. Oh, I think I was supposed to choose something there. Does that mean I'm going to get computer versus computer? Maybe. Again, I've got obviously PlayStation. I've got that overlay. I prefer it with this like TV overlay to fill in the gaps. But you could just use it without a shader at all. It doesn't seem to affect the performance very much. So overlays are pretty good rather than shaders, I'd say. Is this what's going to happen there? Okay, I think it's computer versus computer. Fine.
This should be a great game. The attack broken down by the defense. Harlan. Overmars. Vieira scores. They made the most of the chance. Good control. So the deadlock broken then, 1-0 the score.
So there's a bit of a glitch about 30 seconds or so ago there, I don't know if you noticed it, but it's not bad. I'd say it's definitely playable. I mean the graphics obviously are from 99, so you can't expect too much, but that's just one factor in a game. The gameplay there is really good. It's a great little game there.
Well played.
Yeah, I think you get the idea. I'll quit out of that with select and start. Any of your hotkeys will work because, like I say, it's a RetroArch based emulator, so all of those will apply, and it's really handy for those overlays. I like those. And that's pretty much it for the front end side of things. You put your ROMs up there, and you get your games there. Scrape them individually with the inbuilt scraper. Seems to be the best bet, or you could manually update the game list.xml files and put your own details in there, but Yeah, it doesn't take too long. The only downside is if you want a really portable RetroPie type experience and you want an SD card, you are going to use about 600 meg or so for each of these games. But with the size of SD cards these days, it's not necessarily a problem. Okay, now what I'll do, I'll flip back into the terminal view and we can just see where these files go and the configuration you need to put for them. But that's pretty much it. Copy them across and play them with the emulator. Okay, here we are at a terminal session. We're just going to have a look at how to get PlayStation or PSX, you quite often see that abbreviation, running on the Pi. And this is Pi 2, like I say, it's pretty powerful and seems to run PlayStation games pretty well. I was off put running on it in the first place because I thought the file size and the power of the Pi just wouldn't quite be there, but it seems really good. So I'm in my home directory and I'm going to change into RetroPie folder, change into the ROMs folder, and in here we go into PlayStation folder, PSX. So this is the folder where you'll put your files, and you can access this with FTP or Windows, the Samba shares, so however you put your ROMs up there, you can access it in the same way. And this is what I've put. Now, just to get a little bit more detail, I'm going to put ls-lah, and you can see the files that I've put there. Let's take excuse me, this Crash Bandicoot one as an example. You can see here I've got crashbandicoot.bin, so that's the single file that I've put across, and it's 603 meg, so it's not tiny. We've also got right under here the SRM. Now that's generated by RetroArch, and that's effectively an in-game save, so it's what the PlayStation would have originally saved on the memory card. It's the part of the game as opposed to a .state file that RetroArch itself would have saved. So by playing this using the RetroArch emulator, it's quite happily managing the SRM files, so it's going to remember where I got to if I fire that up again. So that's the example of a .bin file. Now if we go down here, Wipeout's a good example of a game that originally, whilst it's on one CD, part of that CD had audio tracks, and because of that it's got a cue sheet, and a cue sheet basically points to parts within the bin file because that's 682 meg, and the key file is 2K. It's just a text file that points to areas within the bin file of where those audio tracks are, so the emulator knows where to jump to when the game says I want to play track 5, it can say where to go to. And I'll show you what a key file looks like. If we edit it with nano and wipeout.q, here you can see that we've got I used the program called IsoBuster to create this and merge these extra files, and I'll send a link for the tutorial. It'll take about like 20 minutes to read the tutorial about how to merge audio files, but once you've done it once it's really quick and easy, it doesn't take long at all. So you can see here I've got track 1, and track 1 is always, well, it's got here mode 2, and effectively it's the data, it's the game itself. The rest of these tracks are all audio, but here it says exactly whereabouts on the bin file, within the bin file it is. So this key file is just a pointer. So for games that have embedded tracks, typically audio, within it, you'll need a key file. And if you, obviously you'll have the game purchased anyway, and then when you download the ROM of that, it is pretty obvious if it's got separate audio tracks, because in the compressed file when you open it, it'll have quite often .ape files, which are the audio files, and you can convert those back to WAV and then push them back into the bin. If this sounds all complicated, just ignore that part, because most of the games don't have separate audio files, and I can send a link to how to merge these together anyway. So quit out of that with Control X. That's what a key file is, but you can see that typically you don't need it. Tekken 3's got one. I'll just check that one a sec. Nano Tekken3.q. This one's much simpler. You've got the main game file here, and then the audio. There's only 2 separate audio tracks, but it still needs the key file. Now, if I deleted the key file, it would still probably work. It's just I wouldn't get music tracks where the game is trying to play it for me, because it wouldn't have any way of referencing where they are in there. So it's it's just so you can see what's going on, really. But a lot of games don't need a key file because there aren't embedded audio tracks, like Crash Bandicoot and Crash Team Racing and things like that. Okay, Right, that's the folder that you should be putting your bin files, and optionally the Q file if it requires it. And these aren't the only file types that it will accept. So currently, the way RetroPie is set up and Emulation Station set up, let's have a look at what files it will support. And we can do that by reading your current system config, and we do that by nano /etc emulation station /es underscore systems.cfg. So type that, hit enter, and it just shows you what your current configuration for emulation station is. And I'm going to jump to PSX by Control W. It's got a search down the bottom. Type PSX, and it's jumped here, and this is where it's doing the PlayStation. Now, emulation station will show you all files in the PlayStation section if it finds them in that ROM directory we were just in with an extension of .bin, hence why they were showing up, .cbn, I don't know what that is, .image, which is another sort of obviously image file, .m3u, which I think is a type of key file, mdf, don't know what that is, pbp, which I think relates to a format that can support multi-discs, but whilst I've looked at multi-tracks in audio, I haven't looked at multi-disc games. I think Final Fantasy might be that type of game. .toc, which I think stands for table of contents, so that's probably like another key file or another pointer file. .z, which is probably some sort of compressed format, and .znx, and then you've just got the same ones in capitals. Now, you will probably have one here that I haven't got, which is .q, because you saw those earlier. I'm using .qs, but I don't want Emulation Station to be aware of .qs, because if it was for, let's say, Wipeout, I'd have the Wipeout name showing in Emulation Station, and then I'd have Wipeout showing again because it's on my Q file. So I've basically told Emulation Station to forget about Q files because it doesn't need to know about them, and so it only shows when I've got the bin. Hopefully that makes sense. So when it looks down my file in my ROM folder, it's only going to show the .bins. It's going to ignore showing me the .qs because I'd have duplicates otherwise. Now, when the emulator starts and you choose the bin file and it'll play, because it'll play the first part of that bin file, the emulator itself then says, oh, this game is asking for the audio track. I'll look for a key file. So the emulator looks for the key file anyway. It's just Emulation Station won't visually show it to you, so it's not like you can't reference it or use it. It's just I'm not getting it showing in the GUI for the Emulation Station. Just a way of hiding it. And similarly, you could do that if, I don't know, if image files require an M3U to point to particular places, you could delete M3U out of here and just stick with image. But be careful what you take out of here, because if you take it out, an Emulation Station won't see it for you to select it. If you're aware of any extension that the emulator can also run, you can just add it in here. These are just ones that obviously that the emulator's happy with, and that's why they're there. Okay, hopefully that cleared things up, hopefully. These other parts you shouldn't change at all, because they're just quite key to how RetroPie packages it all up and runs, so I just leave it all alone. I've just taken .q out of here to tidy things up. So I'll quit out of that with Control X, and now we'll have a look at the emulator, and you can see the emulator's configuration all in the config directory, which is, if we change directory to opt RetroPie configs, and in here you've got the configuration for the emulators. The emulators themselves sit outside of this, but we're just interested in the configuration really. So I'm going to change directory into the PlayStation configuration, and here you can see we've got a retroarch file, which is what RetroArch will look at when it's running PlayStation files, and emulators.cfg. So first, effectively, when you run a ROM in Emulation Station, it will end up reading this first. So let's have a quick look. Nano emulators.cfg. You can see here, this one's a little different because we've only got one line of an emulator. Quite often you'll get multiples, but here we've got the name of the emulator here, which is LR-PCSX-Reand, and the default for Emulation Station when it runs PlayStation games is LR-PCSX-Reand. It has to be, there's only one, but quite often there'd be like 4 or 5 here, and the default then would tell Emulation Station which of the 4 or 5 to run. It's just so happens that there's only one default emulator for PlayStation. There might be more in the experimental menu in the RetroPie setup, but I don't remember. I don't think there is, but either way I'm quite happy with this emulator, so I'm not too bothered. You can see, so it runs this, and it runs it by kicking off RetroArch here, and then passing the LRPCSX libretro core to it, or library here, libretro.so, so it's running the emulator, and then it passes to the emulator a config file here in apt retropie configs psx retroarch. So that's what it runs. So I'll quit out of that, and there is the file that it passes, the config file. It's going to be pretty, actually yours might look a bit different to this. If I open mine, this is where I've configured the overlay, so you probably won't have quite a lot of these lines, and also I've configured the not necessarily aspect ratio, but the pixel width and height that forces it in the right aspect ratio. It's so a lot of those won't be there, but you can add those in, but that's not really here nor there. Yeah, so it runs that, and once you've got that PlayStation emulator running, it will kick in with those ROMs that we saw earlier. That's pretty much all there is to it. That's where your configuration files are for PlayStation, and they'll be there by default. The important bit really is getting the bin. Okay, we can still see that here. The bin and the queue across, or maybe some games don't need it, like we've got one here, Silent Hill. It must have all of its references, or rather no specific audio tracks within it to reference. But you'll find that some do, some don't. Some might not even download in a bin format. There might be that IMG, in which case you still put that across, and the emulator will quite happily run it. Hopefully that has answered a few questions that you might have about PlayStation. It's certainly worth a go. You need a bit of space. They're pretty big files, so it might be best to pick and choose the games that you want to put up there. If you've got any questions, please put it in the comments. If the video has been helpful at all, please click the thumbs up button. That's great to know that it's useful. And thanks very much for the comments on the other video where you're saying that some of these videos are really helpful and getting you up and running. And I hope that you can see that Emulation Station, along with RetroArch and RetroPie that pulls it all together, is making it easier for you to play some of these retro games. Hopefully you can see that it's really not that difficult once you get up and running. You copy your files across into the ROMs directory, it appears in Emulation Station, and you should be away. And the PlayStation seems to be a really good emulator within that, using that LR-PCXE reloaded. It's really good. So anyway, I'm going to go and try and play a bit more Wipeout better than before, and hope you get up and running too. Thanks.